Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this webinar at the intersection of economics, game theory, and programmatic, with some tips on how to blend these things to unlock programmatic as an advertising tool. We'll get into what that means as we get through the slides here. So I'm your host, Tom Triscari. I'll be taking you through this. Please feel free to ask questions and pop them into the Q&A function or the chat as we run along here, and then we'll have some time at the end as well for Q&A. So feel free to do that during or at the end. All right. So with that, we'll get into it. All right. The way I think about in my many years in programmatic, going back to when I was at Yahoo running a large team in Barcelona, a pan-European team, and Yahoo had just bought Right Media, and we all got our teeth cut very early on that platform, and then later on at Criteo pre-IPO, and a host of other things, including consulting with the largest brands in the world from 215 to 220 on programmatic assessments. And having dabbled also on two particular occasions, was actually grabbing log data and matching it on our own databases just to see if we could pull it off. And it's not the easiest thing to do, but it's also quite insightful. So with that, the very first rule of programmatic in my mind is to never talk about programmatic, is to talk about advertising. And that really doesn't take place that much in the programmatic conversations. If you're ever around, I'm sure many of you are, if you're around a DSP conversation or running an RFP to select a DSP or an SSP, or even in as media plans from a media agency drop down into what's going to go into programmatic, there's often not enough real talk about advertising, but there's a lot of talk about other things. And so that's really important. These tools, any tool, should be used for an advertising outcome, not for the thing itself. So that's important to remember. As I just referred to in a lot of my work and what I do today in still some specialized situations with large brands, and it's not as frequent as it used to be because I'm focusing on other things, but I do like interesting projects with interesting people to actually go get advertising done. And what I really determined is, most of all, it's sort of like, it's a lot of psychology is involved in it, right? It's around like a patient trying to figure out what they're doing with these programmatic tools. Where is their money going? How do they make the best use of it? Because there's some certain things like biases, uncertainties, lack of transparency, and just trying to understand the way these tools can work for an advertising outcome for a brand. So oftentimes it's like having a patient in the chair and really trying to get down to the simplicity of the matter. Now, the questions really are, when I look at the world, is, are you in the advertising business as a marketer, right? Or any of the machinery or the apparatus around the marketer, meaning the supply chain or the programmatic supply chain, which would be coming down from an advertiser. You'd have a media agency. Oftentimes there is a trading desk or a programmatic operating unit within the agency. There's a DSP or more than one involved, content verification, ad serving, SSPs, publishers, and clearly audience data somewhere mixed in there. So in all of that, though, the question is are you in the advertising business, or are you in the spending media budget business? Because those are two very different things. It's very easy to spend media budget. It is very difficult to do good advertising. For those of you out there who know, for example, Les Bennett in the UK at Adam and Eve, or have read the work of Nico Newman, or look at the work of really great agencies that really understand the world, they know very well that it's very easy to spend media budget, but it's also incredibly difficult to actually do good advertising. So it's important to use tools to do advertising. If you're just spending media budget, then there's really no right to complain about the things that you end up with, particularly with programmatic supply chains. So with that, ad tech is basically been designed for spending money. And when you really look at it objectively, and when you look at it and observe just from experience and observing what we see in the markets, these tools are designed for spending money because the jury is out, I think, to a large extent, particularly if you're running proper measurement statistics, you'll find that out pretty quickly. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, just because ad tech is designed for spending money doesn't mean it can't be used to get an advertising outcome. It's just a way you think about it. Now, as you can probably already tell within this, this talk that I'm giving today, it has a lot to do, and it's centered on the concepts of radical transparency. Those concepts come from Ray Dalio, who founded and has the largest hedge fund in the world. It's called Bridgewater Capital. Anyhow, they practice radical transparency in order to make the best probability-based decisions and to try to remove as much emotion and bias from their decision making. Now, that's probably a lot easier in the financial world when you're, I don't know, when you're taking a $100 million position on a stock to move up or down. That's quite a serious business, but it's also quite a serious business when you're spending $100 million on, programmatic display inventory through a DSP. So the question is how good are you at assessing probabilities so that you're getting close to reality in order to make good decisions? If your probabilities are off, then your decision making is going to be way off too, and you're probably going to be disappointed. So the questions become, what do you want from programmatic advertising, right? Do you want to spend media money or do you want to do advertising? Well, clearly most advertisers, they want to spend media budget on programmatic and they want advertising outcomes from it. They just don't want to spend the media money. But then you have to ask yourself, what is true about programmatic advertising? So when we think about that, and you just look at how, for example, I don't know, Ad Exchanger, Digiday, Insider with Laura O'Reilly, and all the press coverage within the space, and you look at issues around viewability and the characteristics of viewability and how good that really is. Obviously, there's a large amount of conversation around fraud and even a larger conversation around brand safety or brand appropriateness on where ads are showing up. So what is true about programmatic advertising when it comes to advertising outcomes? We know what's true about it when we think about media spend, because you can count the amount of money that's moving through it. Every advertiser can do that. So then the question is at the end is, when you think about the world in that way and assessing better probabilities, then why do so many marketers avoid practicing what is true about programmatic and still not get what they want? So the key here to walk away with is to practice what is true about something to get what you want. And that really requires a hard look in order to make better decisions going forward. So that's radical transparency in a nutshell. Now, let's get into this, shift gears a little bit. So, advertising has been around for a really long time. You can read about the history of advertising on Wikipedia and a couple other places. If you want to read about the more contemporary history, I suggest reading the first 5 or 6 chapters of Michael Farmer's Madison Avenue Manslaughter if you want to see a history from, say, the early 1900s all the way up through when holding co started and where we are today. It's a fantastic read. So, but in 5000 BC China, shopkeepers of candy stores would play flutes outside their store to attract customers to come in and sell candy. That's advertising. And why am I pointing this out? I'm pointing this out because, by the way, I don't know if anybody noticed here, but there's a little bit of Hemingway flash fiction. Play flute, attract customers, sell candy. It's that simple, right? That's advertising back then. Now, the job of getting that, let's put it this way. The job of getting advertising done, or the advertising job to be done, has remained stable over time. It is to do just that, is to attract customers to sell something. How that job gets done, obviously, is not stable over time. It changes. So, for example, when we put advertising into the context of innovation theory called jobs to be done, If you want to learn more about that, you should read about Clay Christensen. He's a professor at Harvard and is pretty much the guru on this subject, which of course lots of companies are using this type of innovation theory in their product design today. But you don't need a microwave to heat your food. You just need to heat your food. So then we ask ourselves, well, how many other ways can you heat your food? Well, you can do it on a fireplace. You can do it on a stovetop. I'm sure there's some modern way they're doing it up in a space station up in space. So there's many ways to heat your food, but the point is the job to be done is just to heat your food. Another example would be you don't need a car to get from A to B. You just need to get from A to B. Now, even just going back 10 years ago, things have changed quite a bit. If you're walking around New York or London or any city, there's so many ways now. It used to just be a bus or the underground. Now it's you have bikes everywhere. You've got electric scooters everywhere. You can walk the old-fashioned way. So there's many ways to get from A to B, right? And that is, so the job we're trying to get done is to get from A to B, and there's many ways to do it. Now look at programmatic. So you don't need programmatic to do advertising, to get the advertising job done. That's clear. You can do lots of different things. There's lots of ways to get advertising done. But you do need to do advertising. And if we look at the programmatic ecosystem here in this Lumascape, wow, there's a lot of things in there to get what frankly is a pretty simple job to get done. I'm not saying it's not difficult in the sense of getting advertising outcomes, but there's a lot going on here within the programmatic world, which of course kind of gives us some context around the angst that marketers have and what we read in the trade press around this space. So let's think about it this way, just to hone in on advertising. If we put it real simple. So if advertising is a job to be done, you have a product as an advertiser and you have an audience. And what you want to do very simply is you want to connect the product to the audience, and then you want to know that connection happened, right? So it's sort of like, what do you want to achieve and how do you determine whether or not you've achieved it? And so this is where things move from simplicity to complexity, because the actual job to be done is quite simple and how it gets done is not so simple. So connect your audience, connect your product with an audience or service, and determine that the connection actually shifts your demand curve at some point, meaning you've created something incremental because of the advertising. So in the digital display world, there's really two broad ways to go about it. There's path one, which is the direct way. So buying direct insertion orders, advertisers straight to publisher, you know exactly what you're buying, you know how many impressions, at a guaranteed price, you know exactly the ad unit that you're buying, and you can actually go see these things online because it's a fairly limited world of inventory. For example, ComScore Top 50, which you're going to reach probably 95+% of your audience in a given market, particularly in the US, UK, and other big markets. Then you have path two. So what happened was everything used to be path one, and then programmatic came along. So first there were ad networks, and then programmatic came after ad networks. And what we see here, it got more complex. There's all these intermediaries. And anytime there's an intermediary, there's margin being made. Now, in each one of these steps, as you can see in the red little tag here, there's log data at the impression level happening all over the place. So we have an advertiser to a DSP to an SSP that's sending bid requests, DSP is responding to it. And of course, along the way, there's audience data in various forms, various flavors. And of course, there's content verification on the buy side, and in various places on the sell side. So lots of log data. And of course, in this, which I don't have, is there's an ad server on the publisher side, and there's an ad server on the buyer side to reconcile impressions for tracking purposes. So when we think about that, though, and we bring some game theory concepts into this. Now, we know that transparency has been this thing since, I don't know, 2015, 2016, that advertisers have griped about more and more. They want more transparency from that programmatic supply chain because there's so many intermediaries involved. You also have to recognize that from an accounting perspective, when an advertiser cuts the budget and $100 goes into any advertising channel, programmatic in this case of what we're talking about today, that the advertiser has there's two certainties. The advertiser is going to expense an advertising expense. That is certain. And everyone down the supply chain with 100% certainty is going to recognize revenue. It doesn't, now, whether or not there was an advertising outcome is a totally different conversation, but that's really the two certainties within this. And so that brings up the concept of transparency, which really is about money at the end of the day. So if you go to, as an advertiser, as a marketer, and you go to any one of your, any participant in your supply chain, DSP, SSP, whomever, and you ask them, are you transparent? They're either going to say something like, of course we are, we're the most transparent. You've never seen, it's going to sound like Donald Trump, right? It's going to be, you know, the most beautiful transparency you've ever seen in your life. It's gorgeous. Or they're going to tell you, no, we're not. Hell no, we're not transparent. It reminds me of sort of Brian Lesser when he was running Xaxis, which is probably the smartest thing and the most honest thing I've heard in the programmatic space, when he was asked at an interview on a panel at Cannes, I think it was 2016 or 2017. And he said, no, we are transparent about not being transparent. And so at least that's something. And there's a whole other conversation around black box models, particularly with the recent Google news. And there's pros and cons to everything, but that's a totally different conversation that happy to take up, you know, off at a different time with anyone who wants to. So if they're not transparent, if they tell you that, then they're not transparent, and at least you know. You move from thinking to knowing, right? And if they say, yes, we're the most transparent, so you say, great, can I get my log data today? Because I'm running a process where I'm stitching together all my log data, and I want to see what's going on an always-on basis where I can log in instead of having a bunch of auditors or who are doing things manually or manually and periodically. So it's at this point, that works for linear television. It doesn't work for always on programmatic spend when you need to know every day and across different dimensions on, you know, what's my working media? What are the fees of these parties in between each other at the campaign level, at the portfolio level, at the country or regional level, because you can benchmark across all of those things. So if they say yes, well then by definition, then the accessing of the data and whatever permissions are needed should happen rather quickly. You'll find out in reality, they say yes, but they really mean no, because they'll slow things down, right? Now, that happens a lot. It's happening less and less these days where there is some, I would say, incremental transparency happening. But this little tree here, this question tree, if you really want to know if your supply chain partners are transparent, just take them through this tree and you will observe it for yourself. And then you can have an honest conversation around, like I talked about earlier, around probabilities and expectations. But until you do this, you're really not thinking about transparency probably in the right way. Now, a lot of people ask, what is log data? Well, this is a sample. This goes 11 pages, by the way. This is just one page. This is what a bid request looks like. And this is a bid request from an SSP to a DSP. The machine reads it, and on the DSP side, they crunch some numbers and they come back with a bid response, and you either win the impression and serve an ad or you don't. But this is log data. This is what log data looks like in code form. Right. And again, this is 11 pages long. So you could think of this when you think of log data, think of this code, but just think of it in terms of a database. It's just columns and rows in a database. And this is something that's really important for advertisers to have in order to gain a more equal ground on understanding about the type of the pricing of the type of ad quality that they're buying. So That brings up another example. So I'm sure a lot of you here today and a lot of marketers, we know that they're running inclusion lists. So that would mean, hey, all right, I'm buying through my DSP and I only want to give bid responses for an inclusion list of 4,000 or 5,000 URLs. And somebody somewhere went along and they curated this list of URLs that were passed some sort of brand safety test, had some sort of other, maybe in quotes, guarantees around it, meaning that it was quality inventory with quality audiences that come to those sites with not too much ad clutter on the page, with good ad units. And so they have this inclusion list. But the question is, how do you know, if you ask any marketer, well, how do you know your inclusion list is running true? Well, it's because my media agency is telling me. They kind of run some reports. Well, if you just dig into it, you're going to find out pretty quickly that those reports aren't that great. They're pretty much meaningless because they don't tell what's actually happening. So the only way, from my view, that I've ever seen that you can actually know if this inclusion list is running true, meaning you have 5,000 and you should be only running ads on those 5,000. What you do is you have, for example, ads.txt, you've got sellers JSON, and then you've got tag verified, meaning just that there's, even though it is a self-certification, people can actually go check to see within the what's listed on the domain, and is that a real business? Is it done in Bradstreet? Can you run a credit check on them? And so with those three things, those are three data sets that are available to any advertiser, but what's not available is your own log data. And you can't know if your inclusion list is running true until you bring log data into this triangulation of these other three data sets, and then you can know for sure. To me, it's always stunning that how is it that you have this opportunity to know with absolute certainty versus guessing? Why wouldn't you go do that, particularly if you're complaining about supply chain transparency? Those two things can't coincide. Now, we'll go into this last topic here, which is more of a, I think, probably the most important use case. And it has to do with how all markets function in programmatic included. So think about it this way. You have spent $1 million on a campaign as an advertiser, or you've spent $100 million across various brands, portfolios in a given year on programmatic advertising through a DSP. And the prices that you paid are totally observable because you can get that data either in aggregate form from your DSP's reporting platform, or obviously in the log data from your DSP as well. So you can get this distribution curve, and you can know that I spent on the high end, I spent a $10 CPM, on the low end it's 1 and an average of 5. That's observable. What's not observable is the ad quality you bought. Now, I can hear people already. No, we have double verify, we have integral ad science, we have some sort of content verification. But the question is how accurate is that information? How is it processed? What does it really mean? You got to dig into these things a little bit more. But let's just assume that there is pretty decent, data coming through your content verification partner. But you can have this distribution curve where have a quality of 10, which is really good. That's your best quality, the ideal quality. Fraud-free, brand safe, totally viewable. And then you have 1 on the other end of the scale, which would be the opposite characteristics. You can also throw in attention metrics layer here as well, which is quite interesting because that adds an element to define this curve, to make it observable. That's the key. So how do you make ad quality really, truly observable, so that in the sense of radical transparency, that you believe your own probabilities, that it's actually accurate, right? Now, with these two things together, with the two data sets matched together from a log data perspective, now you've got something. So why is this important? It's important because if you pay $10 for something, then from a hedge fund thinking, from a financial mind thinking, just a common sense thinking, you would want a commensurate quality because you've paid on the far end of your scale. And what you don't want is to pay $10 or bid 10 in a first price auction and get ad quality of 1. Because if you do that, you've just destroyed value. You paid $10 for something that's worth $1. And if you do that again and again, there's no way you're going to get an incremental advertising result. That's just theoretically and practically impossible. Now, where, in my view, this is my view on this, that where I think programmatic has told a story of religion that has been believed probably for far too long, hence some of the issues we see in the market today, is that when you buy programmatically, the story goes, you can buy for a low price and get high quality. And I ask anyone here in the audience today, and to ask all of your friends in the business, find me another market in the world where that happens. And if you find it, email me, let me know, give me a call, and tell me where there's another market where you all day long and on a repeatable basis, you can actually get that kind of deal all the time, because I can't find one so far. So if you know of one, please let me know. Now, here's the last piece, and we can go into some questions. So this has to do with the psychology of bias in certain things, but this is a famous question by two psychologists that were the creators of what now is today behavioral economics, which has permeated almost everything. And this started in the 50s by Tversky and Kahneman. So the question is, Linda is 31 years old, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. So the question is, which is more probable? And 1 second here, there we go. Linda is a consultant, or Linda is a consultant and active in the feminist movement. Now, 9 times out of 10, people choose the second answer because they read the description. And the fact is the answer is it's the first one that is more probable, right? Because if there's a 50% chance Linda is a consultant and a 50% chance that she is active in the feminist movement, then 50% times 50% is a 25% probability. And if Linda's just a consultant, it's a 50% probability. But people read into the descriptions because of the way that our minds work, because human beings are really terrible at assessing probabilities, true probabilities, because we have all these biases, all sorts of things. I mean, just to name a few within the advertising business that are prevalent: availability bias, success bias, information bias, escalation of commitment, so on and so forth. And so we let all those things get in our way. I think the classic example is around, particularly in the direct response space, where a vendor will sell you on guaranteed ROAS, right? Guaranteed return on ad spend. If you spend money with us, you'll get 180% ROAS. So you're buying ROAS, you're not buying advertising, because the ROAS probably, most statistically, cannot possibly actually be true, and it can't be true for everyone who buys the product. And there's lots of just basic reasons for that. And the most important one is that if an advertiser could always get that kind of return, then they would never invest in anything else except for advertising. Why would P&G invest money and allocate capital to building a new manufacturing plant for whatever product they're making and get like a 15 or 20% return on that, when they can get, a huge return for all they would do is advertising? So that's why it doesn't make much sense. But the point of this is, going back to the very beginning of our talk here, that you have to assess the probabilities of how you're thinking about programmatic as a tool for advertising. So with that wraps it up.